What if everything we think we know about medicine started not in sterile laboratories, but in the shadowy corners of forgotten forests and the echoing halls of ancient temples? Before the stethoscope, before the scalpel, there was the whispered word, the sacred plant, the ritual performed under a blanket of stars. For the vast majority of human history, confronting sickness was a journey into the profound unknown. It was a time when a fever could feel like a curse, a broken bone a sign of divine displeasure, and the person who could intervene was seen as someone who held the keys to life and death itself. They were the mysterious figures who walked the delicate line between revered healer and feared sorcerer, their knowledge passed down not in textbooks but in secrets. This is the world we are about to enter, a world where medicine was not just a science but an art deeply woven with spirituality, mystery, and a touch of what we might now call magic. We are going to travel across continents and centuries into the heart of these whispered tales of ancient healers. We'll stand with the shaman in the Americas, feeling the rhythm of the drum as they journey into the spirit world to retrieve a lost soul. We'll walk through the grand temples of Egypt, where physician priests diagnosed ailments by interpreting dreams believed to be messages from the gods. We will uncover the potent and sometimes shocking remedies they used, remedies that could involve ingredients that sound more like something from a fantasy novel than a pharmacy. This journey is more than just a catalogue of bizarre cures. It is an exploration of the human spirit's relentless quest for answers in the face of suffering. It's a story about the courage to confront the unknown and the powerful, often perilous, role of those who were chosen, or who chose themselves to be the bridge between the world of the healthy and the realm of illness. So prepare to set aside modern assumptions, to step into a time when healing was an intimate, terrifying, and awe-inspiring act. The secrets of these ancient practitioners have been waiting in the shadows for centuries, and we are about to bring them into the light. To understand this world, we must begin with perhaps the most iconic of all ancient healers, the shaman. Picture a vast, windswept landscape, the endless taiga of Siberia or the deep, ancient forests of North America. Here, the line between the world you can touch and the world of spirits was believed to be incredibly thin. In these communities, the shaman was not merely a doctor. They were a spiritual explorer, a psychologist, and a botanist all rolled into one. Theirs was a calling that rarely came by choice. An individual might be marked for this path by a life-altering event, a sudden, unexplained vision, a near-fatal childhood illness, or being struck by lightning and surviving. The community would see this not as a random misfortune, but as a sign. The spirits had chosen this person. They had been taken to the brink of death and brought back, forever changed, now possessing a foot in both worlds. This initiation was often terrifying, a brutal dismantling of the old self to make way for a new identity as a bridge for the entire community. The training that followed was rigorous and lifelong. An apprentice shaman would learn from an elder, committing to memory the intricate properties of every plant, fungus, and mineral in their environment. This was a profound, intimate knowledge of the local pharmacy provided by nature. They knew which root could soothe a fever, which leaf could slow bleeding, and which berry, if used incorrectly, could bring visions or even death. But this botanical expertise was only half of their power. The shaman's true specialty was navigating the spirit world. They mastered techniques like the relentless, hypnotic rhythm of a drum to enter a trance state. In this altered consciousness, their soul was believed to journey away from their physical body, traveling to unseen realms. The core of their healing philosophy was that physical illness was almost always a symptom of a deeper spiritual crisis. A person might become sick because their soul had fled their body due to a terrible fright, what we might call trauma, or because a harmful spirit had invaded, creating imbalance. The healing ritual itself was a dramatic, high-stakes performance for the entire village. The shaman, adorned in symbolic regalia, would drum and chant, embarking on a perilous journey to find the patient's lost soul and convince it to return, or to do battle with the malevolent spirit causing the affliction. For everyone gathered, this was not mere theater, it was a real-time spiritual intervention. The ceremony created a powerful container for hope and belief, which in itself was a potent medicine. The shaman's role was to restore harmony, not just within the individual, but between the individual, the community, and the entire cosmos. Their work was a vivid reminder that health was a state of profound connection, and that disconnection from the spiritual world could manifest as tangible sickness in the physical body. But the shaman's path was just one way of navigating the mysteries of the body. For a perspective that feels strikingly modern in its method, yet still deeply mystical in its foundations, we must travel to ancient Egypt. Here, along the fertile banks of the Nile, healing was an institution. The Egyptian healer, known as a SWNW, was a fascinating hybrid of scientist and priest. They worked within a structured system, their knowledge recorded meticulously on lengthy scrolls known as medical papyri. The most famous of these, the Ebers Papyrus, is a breathtaking document. It reads like a physician's desk reference from over 3,500 years ago, detailing hundreds of conditions and their treatments, from fractures to digestive troubles. This was not a collection of random superstitions, but a systematic attempt to catalog, diagnose, and cure. What gave the SWNW a unique advantage was their intimate knowledge of the human body, gained from a surprising source, the practice of mummification. While their religious beliefs prevented them from dissecting bodies in the way we might think of anatomy today, the elaborate process of preparing the dead for the afterlife provided an unparalleled education. They saw organs removed, they understood the basic structure of the skeleton, and they gained a practical sense of the body's internal systems. This empirical knowledge was then merged seamlessly with a spiritual worldview. For the Egyptian physician-priest, a disease could have two very different causes. It might be a natural imbalance, something that could be addressed with a physical remedy. But it could also be a punishment from an angry god, or the work of a demon that had invaded the body. Diagnosis, therefore, was a dual process. A patient visiting a SWNW would undergo an examination that feels remarkably familiar. The healer would check the pulse, inspect the body's various fluids, and ask detailed questions about symptoms. But they would also inquire about the patient's dreams, believing them to be messages from the divine realm that could reveal the spiritual root of an illness. This blend of observation and intuition led to some truly astonishing treatments, many of which have been validated by modern science. They used honey extensively on wounds, a practice we now know is effective because honey is naturally antibacterial, creating a sterile barrier that prevents infection. Even more incredible, there are records of applying moldy bread to sores. Centuries before Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, these ancient healers had stumbled upon the antibiotic properties of certain molds. They created elaborate prescriptions that combined practical ingredients like aloe vera for soothing burns with more symbolic elements meant to drive out evil spirits. A single treatment could contain measured doses of effective herbal compounds alongside chants meant to empower the medicine. For the SWNW, it was all part of the same system. The physical and the spiritual were not separate arenas. To heal the body, you often had to appease the gods. While the Egyptian SWNW blended observation with ritual, another ancient civilization developed an approach to healing that placed the power of the mind at its very center. Journey now to the sun-drenched landscapes of ancient Greece, to the sanctuaries dedicated to Asclepius, the god of medicine. These were not just temples, they were the most sophisticated wellness centers of the classical world, known as Asclepians. Picture a sprawling complex, not hidden away, but often built in locations chosen for their serene beauty and healing properties, near a sacred spring, on a hillside with clean air, surrounded by lush gardens. A person seeking a cure would travel, sometimes for great distances, arriving with a mix of desperation and hope. The experience that followed was a meticulously designed program aimed at treating the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. The first step for any patient was a period of purification. They would bathe in cold, sacred waters, fast for a time, and offer a sacrifice, perhaps a rooster or a small cake, to Asclepius. This process was crucial. It was about shedding the impurities of the outside world and the journey, preparing the individual not just physically but psychologically to enter a sacred space and be receptive to healing. The entire atmosphere of the Asclepion was engineered to induce a state of calm and optimism. Patients would see pinakes, stone tablets left by grateful former visitors, inscribed with stories of miraculous cures. They would hear hymns being sung, smell the fragrant incense, and walk among statues depicting the god in his benevolent form, often accompanied by his symbol, a serpent, an animal associated with rebirth and regeneration because of its ability to shed its skin. Before the main event even began, the stage was set for a powerful therapeutic experience. The core of the healing ritual was a practice known as incubatio, or temple sleep. After their purification, the patient would be led into the abaton, a special hall reserved for this sacred sleep. They would lie on a klein, a simple couch, in the quiet, darkened space alongside other hopeful individuals. As they drifted into sleep, priests of Asclepius would move among them. The belief was that during this night, the god himself would visit the patient in their dreams. These were not ordinary dreams. They were expected to be vivid and prophetic. The patient might dream of Asclepius touching their afflicted body part, or of his sacred serpent gently licking a wound. They might witness a symbolic operation or receive a direct message about what they must do to be healed. When morning came, the priests, who acted as dream interpreters, would listen carefully to each patient's account. Their role was to help decipher the divine message. If a patient dreamed of the god applying a salve, the priests might prepare a corresponding herbal remedy. If the dream involved a specific instruction, like exercising a limb or bathing in a certain pool, that would become the prescribed treatment. This practice of incubatio was a brilliant form of early psychotherapy, harnessing the placebo effect and the power of suggestion long before these concepts had names. The patient's own subconscious, activated by the potent environment and their deep belief, was guided to produce a dream that would then dictate a tangible path to wellness. But the dream interpretation was only one part of a comprehensive regimen. The healing at an Asclepion was profoundly holistic. Alongside the dream therapy, patients received what we would now recognize as a full wellness retreat program. Their diet was carefully regulated, emphasizing simple, nutritious foods. They were encouraged to engage in gentle exercise like walks through the temple grounds. There were theaters for performances meant to lift the spirit and spaces for conversation and community, addressing the isolation that often accompanies prolonged illness. Hydrotherapy, using the sacred springs, was a common prescription. The entire system recognized that a cure was more than just the absence of symptoms. It was a restoration of balance and well-being achieved through mental suggestion, physical care, and spiritual solace. In these tranquil sanctuaries, the Greeks demonstrated an intuitive understanding that the mind's belief could be one of the most powerful medicines of all. Across the Mediterranean from the Greek Asclepians, another ancient civilization was developing a system of healing so comprehensive and sophisticated that it continues to influence wellness practices across the globe today. In the world of ancient India, the pursuit of health was a profound spiritual and scientific quest, leading to the creation of a medical tradition known as Ayurveda, which translates to the science of life. This was not merely a collection of cures but an entire philosophy of existence, a detailed roadmap for living in harmony with the natural world to achieve a long, vibrant, and balanced life. While the Greeks were harnessing the power of dreams, Ayurvedic sages were meticulously observing the patterns of the universe and the human body. concluding that the microcosm of the individual was a perfect reflection of the macrocosm of nature. The entire foundation of Ayurvedic medicine rests upon a powerful and elegant concept, the three vital energies or doshas. These are not physical substances but rather universal principles that govern all physiological and psychological processes. The first, vata, is composed of the elements of air and space. It is the energy of movement governing everything from the blinking of an eye to the pulsation of the heart and the flow of thoughts through the mind. When in balance, vata grants creativity and vitality. When out of balance, it manifests as anxiety, dryness, and irregularity. The second dosha, pitta, is born from fire and water. It is the force of transformation, controlling metabolism, digestion, and even our intellectual comprehension. A balanced pitta individual is sharp, courageous, and warm. An excess can lead to inflammation, acidity, and irritability. Finally, kapha, structured from earth and water, provides the body with stability, structure, and lubrication. It is the energy that builds our tissues and provides stamina. In harmony, kapha expresses as love and calmness. When aggravated, it can result in lethargy, congestion, and weight gain. According to Ayurvedic wisdom, every single person is born with a unique blueprint, a specific proportion of these three doshas called their prakriti or inherent nature. Some people are naturally fiery pitta types, while others are more airy vata or grounded kapha. Health in this system is not a one-size-fits-all state. It is the dynamic and perfect balance of one's unique doshic constitution. Disease, therefore, is simply a signal that this natural balance has been disrupted, perhaps by poor diet, seasonal changes, emotional stress, or unhealthy habits. An Ayurvedic physician, or Vaidya, was not just a disease fighter but a master detective of balance. Their first task was always to diagnose the patient's inherent constitution and then identify which dosha had become aggravated. The goal of any treatment was not to attack the symptoms, but to gently guide the strayed dosha back into its proper equilibrium. The tools these sages used to restore balance were astonishingly vast and advanced. They compiled a massive pharmacopoeia of thousands of herbs, minerals, and metals. Turmeric was used for its anti-inflammatory properties, ginger to stoke the digestive fire, and holy basil or tulsi as an adaptogen to help the body resist stress. But their knowledge went far beyond simple herbalism. They became pioneers of a process known as rasashastra, the alchemical art of purifying and preparing metals like mercury, sulfur, iron, and gold into fine, bioavailable powders called basmas. These potent preparations were used in minute doses to treat deep-seated chronic conditions, a practice that demonstrates a remarkable understanding of mineral-based medicine centuries before its use in the West. Yet, perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of Ayurveda was its profound emphasis on prevention. Healing was not something to be sought only after falling ill, it was a daily practice. Diet was considered the first and most important medicine, with specific foods recommended to pacify each dosha. Practices like yoga were prescribed not just as physical exercise but as a way to purify the body's energy channels, and meditation was understood as a vital tool for calming the mind and, by extension, balancing the entire system. The sophistication of this ancient science is stunningly preserved in texts like the Sushruta Samhita, a compendium attributed to the sage Sushruta that dates back to around 600 years before the Common Era. This text is a monumental achievement describing over 1,000 illnesses, hundreds of medicinal plants, and detailed preparations for complex surgical instruments. Most astonishingly, Sushruta provides intricate step-by-step descriptions of surgical procedures that would not be commonly practiced in Europe for another 2 millennia. He details methods for extracting cataracts by couching the clouded lens, effectively restoring sight. He explains techniques for reconstructing noses and ears, often lost as punishment for crimes, by using skin flaps grafted from the patient's cheek or forehead, a foundational procedure in the history of plastic surgery. The text even covers the setting of fractures, the removal of bladder stones, and ethical guidelines for the surgeon. This work stands as a powerful testament to a culture where the healer's role seamlessly integrated the gentle art of balancing inner energies with the precise, fearless skill of a master surgeon, embodying a holistic vision of health that remains deeply relevant even now. While the great traditions of India and Greece were developing in relative isolation, another kind of medical revolution was quietly unfolding along the winding, dusty trails of the Silk Road. This was not the work of philosophers in tranquil temples, but of practical merchants and healers who operated in the bustling, chaotic caravanserais that dotted the route from China to the Mediterranean. These were the mysterious Silk Road apothecaries, and their shops were treasure troves of the exotic and the unknown. They were more than just traders, they were living libraries, the crucial conduits through which the medical wisdom of entire civilizations began to flow, mix, and transform. Imagine stepping into one of these establishments, perhaps in a vibrant city like Samarkand or Bukhara. The air is thick with an intoxicating blend of smells, the sharp, medicinal scent of camphor, the sweet, resinous aroma of myrrh, and the warm, earthy fragrance of spices. Jars and sacks line the walls, containing substances that would have seemed like sheer magic to a traveler from afar. From the mountains of China came dried rhubarb root, prized as a powerful purgative. From the fields of Persia arrived saffron, the delicate crimson stigmas of a crocus flower, used to treat melancholy and soothe the nerves. And from the deserts of southern Arabia came frankincense, the aromatic gum resin burned in temples, but also ground into powders to reduce inflammation and heal wounds. These apothecaries were the internet of their day, a global network for the exchange of tangible, potent materia medica, but the trade was not merely in goods. The most valuable cargo traveling the Silk Road was intangible. It was knowledge. A Persian physician might learn from an Indian trader about the detailed system of the three doshas and begin to incorporate concepts of balance and humors into his own practice. A Chinese healer, schooled in the principles of yin and yang and the flow of qi, could share pulse diagnosis techniques with a Greek doctor who understood the four humors. In these cross-cultural exchanges, diagnostic methods merged and evolved. The idea that a patient's pulse could reveal the health of their internal organs, a cornerstone of traditional Chinese medicine, fascinated and influenced Western practitioners. Similarly, the complex herbal formulas of the East were enriched by the surgical knowledge and anatomical observations filtering in from the West. This fusion of ideas created entirely new, hybrid systems of medicine, most notably within the Islamic caliphates that came to control vast stretches of the Silk Road. In magnificent centers of learning like Baghdad's House of Wisdom, scholars undertook a monumental project. They systematically translated medical texts from Greek, Persian, Sanskrit, and Chinese into Arabic. Physicians like Al-Razi and Ibn Sina did not just preserve this knowledge, they synthesized it. They took the humoral theory of the Greeks, the surgical precision described by Sushruta, the complex pharmacy of the Persians, and the diagnostic methods of the Chinese, and wove them into a coherent, expansive medical system. Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine, a 5-volume encyclopedia, became the standard medical textbook in Europe and the Islamic world for centuries, a direct result of this Silk Road synthesis. The apothecaries' shops were the starting point for this grand collaboration, proving that when cultures connect, even something as intimate as healing can become a shared, evolving human endeavor. Yet for all their perceived power and knowledge, the Druids remain the most elusive of all ancient healers, their true voices lost to the silence they themselves imposed. In a practice that set them apart from scribes in Egypt or Greece, the Druids strictly forbade the writing down of their vast knowledge. Theirs was an oral tradition, a sacred trust passed meticulously from master to student through years of rigorous memorization. They believed that true wisdom, especially of the magical and medicinal arts, could not be imprisoned on a page. It was a living, breathing force that had to be internalized and understood at a profound level. This commitment to secrecy means that almost everything we know about them is filtered through the eyes of their conquerors, primarily the Romans, who viewed the Druids with a potent combination of fascination and visceral fear. Roman writers like Julius Caesar and Pliny the Elder provide our most detailed accounts, but we must read their words with caution, understanding that they were describing a culture they sought to dismantle, often portraying the Druids as barbaric priests who practiced human sacrifice to underscore the Roman justification for their conquest. Peering through this biased lens, we catch fractured glimpses of a sophisticated intellectual class, but the full symphony of their understanding has faded into the whispers of the wind through the oak leaves, leaving us with haunting fragments of a lost world of healing. Now let us journey even further back in time to the very cradle of civilization itself, ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here, in the world's first great cities, the concept of illness was understood through a lens of profound spiritual conflict. For the Mesopotamians, the human body was a fragile vessel navigating a world teeming with invisible, often hostile forces. A sudden headache, a lingering fever, a mysterious skin condition, these were rarely seen as random biological events. Instead, they were interpreted as direct consequences of supernatural activity. Perhaps the sufferer had unknowingly offended a deity, breaking a sacred rule and earning their wrath. More commonly, an illness was believed to be the work of a malevolent demon or a restless ghost, a vengeful spirit that had managed to invade the body and take up residence, causing pain and disruption from within. The key figure in this high-stakes spiritual battle was the Ashapu, a role we might clumsily translate as an exorcist priest, but whose function was far more complex. The Ashapu was a master diagnostician, a scholar, and a ritual specialist all in one. His first and most critical task was not to treat the symptom but to answer the fundamental question: why is this person sick? What divine anger or which specific demon is responsible? To uncover this truth, he relied on the art of divination, believing that the gods had written the answers to all of life's mysteries into the fabric of the world, if one only knew how to read the signs. One of the most important methods was extispicy, the examination of a sacrificial sheep's liver. The liver was considered the seat of emotion and life force. The Ashapu would meticulously inspect its lobes, markings, and anomalies, comparing them to a vast library of clay model livers that served as a diagnostic key. A peculiar bump or an unusual color in a specific zone might indicate the handiwork of a particular demon or reveal which god required appeasement. Other forms of divination included observing the flight patterns of birds or the behavior of oil when poured into water, each offering a coded message from the divine realm. Once the cause was identified, the Ashapu would orchestrate an elaborate ritual to drive out the invasive entity. This was not a simple prayer, it was a meticulously scripted performance designed to overwhelm and expel the supernatural intruder. The ceremony would involve the recitation of specific, potent incantations, often passed down for generations. These were not mere words but powerful weapons, believed to have the force to command demons and soothe angry gods. The rituals could be intense and multisensory. Special herbs might be burned to produce purifying smoke, loud noises were made to frighten the demon, and figurines representing the disease-causing spirit might be created and then ritually destroyed or buried, symbolically trapping the evil. The Ashapu might also create personalized amulets for the patient to wear, small objects inscribed with protective spells or made from specific materials believed to repel evil influences. The entire process was a form of spiritual surgery, a systematic effort to restore order by forcefully removing the chaos that had taken root within the patient. Yet, Mesopotamian society recognized that not all afflictions were purely spiritual. Alongside the Ashapu worked another healer, the Asu. This practitioner was less concerned with angry gods and more focused on the tangible, physical body. The Asu was essentially a herbalist and wound dresser, dealing with visible ailments like broken bones, cuts, skin rashes, and insect bites. Their approach was remarkably practical and empirical, grounded in a deep knowledge of the local flora and minerals. Clay tablets from the period list hundreds of their remedies. They used beer as an antiseptic wash for wounds, mixed date syrup and herbs into soothing bombs, and prepared poultices from various plants to reduce swelling. They set fractures with splints and bandages, demonstrating a hands-on understanding of the body's structure. What's fascinating is that these two systems, the spiritual exorcism of the Ashapu and the practical herbalism of the Asu, were not seen as being in opposition. They operated in parallel, often complementing each other. A patient might visit the Asu to have a wound cleaned and bandaged, and then consult the Ashapu to perform a ritual ensuring that no evil spirit entered the body through that same injury. This duality reflects a sophisticated worldview that acknowledged illness as a complex phenomenon with both supernatural and natural components, requiring a comprehensive response that addressed the patient's body, mind, and spirit simultaneously. This relentless quest to control the invisible forces of health finds a remarkable parallel on the other side of the world, in ancient China, where a different but equally profound understanding of life's energy took root. Here, a unique class of healer emerged, one whose ambitions reached beyond curing disease to achieving the ultimate prize, physical immortality. These were the Taoist alchemists, and their work was a breathtaking fusion of spiritual philosophy, experimental chemistry, and medical genius, all dedicated to harmonizing with the fundamental force of the universe, the Tao or the Way. For them, health was not merely the absence of illness, but a state of perfect alignment with the natural flow of existence, a flow they sought to master so completely that death itself could be cheated. The philosophical bedrock of their entire system was the dynamic interplay of yin and yang. They saw these two opposing yet complementary forces in every aspect of the cosmos and by extension within the human body. Yin represented the cool, dark, passive, and substantial aspects like the quiet of night or the solidity of an organ. Yang was the warm, bright, active, and energetic force, the heat of the sun or the beat of a heart. Health was a graceful, ever-shifting dance between these two principles. An excess of yang could lead to fever, inflammation, and agitation, while an excess of yin might result in chills, lethargy, and stagnation. The goal of the Taoist healer was to diagnose these imbalances and restore the essential harmony, a concept that extended into the theory of the 5 phases, or Wu Xing. This framework mapped the relationships between wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, connecting them to seasons, emotions, colors, sounds, and specific organs in the body. A skilled practitioner could, for example, diagnose a liver problem associated with wood that was affecting the stomach associated with earth because in the cycle of control, wood is said to restrain earth. This intricate web of connections created a holistic model where a treatment for a physical ailment might involve dietary changes, emotional counseling, and herbal remedies tailored to rebalance the entire system. At the very heart of this system pulsed the concept of Kai, the vital energy or life force that animates all living things. The Taoists believed that Kai flowed through the body along an intricate network of pathways called meridians. Health was synonymous with the smooth, abundant, and unimpeded flow of Kai. Illness, in contrast, was a blockage, a deficiency, or a rebellion of this vital energy. To influence this flow, they developed some of the most enduring therapeutic techniques in history. Acupuncture involved the insertion of extremely fine needles into specific points along the meridians to unblock stagnant Kai, sedate an overactive energy, or tonify a weakness. Moxibustion, often used in conjunction, involved burning a small, spongy herb called mugwort near or on these same points to warm the meridians and drive out cold, damp influences that were thought to obstruct the flow. These practices were not random stabbings or simple cauterization. They were precise interventions based on a deep theoretical understanding of the body's energy landscape. While these methods for regulating Qi were aimed at promoting longevity, the Taoist alchemists pursued a far more radical goal, the creation of an elixir that would confer absolute immortality. This branch of their work, known as Weiden or external alchemy, involved elaborate experiments in their laboratories. They were particularly fascinated by substances that seemed to possess their own transcendent qualities. The most prized of all was cinnabar, a brilliant red mineral that is the primary ore of mercury. Its vibrant color was associated with blood and life, and its ability to transform when heated, releasing mercury and then recombining into new compounds, made it a symbol of metamorphosis and eternal life. They believed that by consuming an elixir made from purified cinnabar, they could transform their mortal flesh into an incorruptible, eternal body. The tragic irony, of course, is that these potions were often lethally poisonous. Historical records tell of emperors and nobles who died from elixir poisoning, their quest for eternal life hastening their demise. Yet, in their failed attempts, these alchemists made monumental, if unintended, contributions to science. Their meticulous processes of distillation, sublimation, and experimentation laid the groundwork for modern chemistry and pharmacology. Their lasting legacy, however, is found not in the poisonous elixirs but in the profound medical system they helped codify. The Taoist emphasis on prevention, on living in harmony with the seasons, and on balancing the mind and body became central tenets of traditional Chinese medicine. Their vast herbal pharmacopoeia, organized according to yin-yang and five-phase theory, includes remedies like ginseng to strengthen Qi and ginger to warm the body, which are still used globally today. They understood that true healing was about fostering resilience and balance, a concept that resonates powerfully in our modern world. The Taoist alchemist, in their dual role as spiritual seeker and practical physician, ultimately demonstrated that the most potent elixir might not be a magical potion, but a life lived in conscious, harmonious flow with the invisible energies that sustain us all. From the mystical quests for immortality in ancient China, we now turn to a world where survival was measured not in millennia, but in the brutal, immediate aftermath of battle. This was the domain of the Roman army medic, the medicus, a figure whose authority came not from divine whispers but from the grim, unflinching demands of warfare. Far removed from the tranquil temples of Asclepius or the alchemical labs of the Taoists, Roman military medicine was a triumph of pragmatism, organization, and raw empirical learning. The Roman war machine understood that a soldier was a valuable, trained asset, and losing men to infection after a battle was as unacceptable as losing them to the enemy's sword. This simple, cold calculus gave birth to one of the most advanced medical systems the ancient world would ever see. At the heart of this system were the valetudinaria, the world's first dedicated military field hospitals. These were not makeshift tents but permanent, purpose-built structures within the sprawling legionary fortresses that dotted the frontiers of the empire. Archaeologists have uncovered their remains, revealing a layout that would feel strangely familiar to us today. They were designed with sanitation and efficiency in mind, featuring separate wards to isolate patients with infectious diseases, operating theaters, latrines with running water, and even kitchens for preparing special diets. A steady supply of fresh water was piped in through aqueducts, and the buildings were positioned to maximize sunlight and fresh air, both understood intuitively to aid recovery. This was an institutional approach to healthcare, a stark contrast to the personalized spiritual journeys of earlier healers. The goal was standardization and scale, to process the wounded from entire legions and return as many fighting men as possible to the front lines. The tools these Medici wielded are a testament to their sophisticated and often terrifying surgical skill. Excavations at sites like Pompeii and military outposts have uncovered intricate sets of bronze and iron instruments that would not look out of place in a modern operating theater. There were finely crafted scalpels with replaceable steel blades, bone drills for trepanation, and complex forceps for extracting deeply embedded weapons. One of the most common and critical procedures was the removal of arrowheads. Roman Medici developed a specialized instrument called the valsella, a fearsome-looking clawed forceps designed to grip a barbed arrowhead securely so it could be withdrawn without causing further damage. For arrows that penetrated bone, they had delicate bone levers to carefully pry them loose. Amputation saws, made with serrated blades for efficient cutting, show that they were prepared to sacrifice a limb to save a life, a drastic measure they understood could prevent gangrene from spreading. The precision of these tools indicates a profound knowledge of human anatomy, gained not from sacred texts but from the relentless, hands-on experience of treating traumatic injuries. This knowledge was brutally empirical. While a Greek physician might ponder the balance of humors, a Roman medicus on the Danube frontier was focused on observable cause and effect. He learned through repetition that wounds washed with clean water and a solution of vinegar, a mild acetic acid with antiseptic properties, were far less likely to fester and kill the patient. They used honey, just as the Egyptians did, to dress wounds, creating a protective antibacterial barrier. They mastered the art of suturing with needle and thread, and for pain relief they had a powerful, if dangerous, ally, opium. They understood the sedative and analgesic qualities of poppy juice, administering it to ease the agony of surgery and the torment of recovery. Their pharmacopoeia was a practical one, filled with herbs and substances proven to work on the battlefield, compiled in manuals that were standardized across the legions. The tale of the Roman medicus is ultimately one of necessity as the mother of invention. It highlights a pivotal moment where medical advance was driven not by spiritual belief, but by logistical imperative and cold, hard organization. The Roman army was a massive, complex bureaucracy, and its medical corps was an integral part of that machine. It valued results above all else, creating a system where proven techniques were disseminated, facilities were standardized, and the healer's role was clearly defined within a chain of command. This environment fostered incredible innovation in trauma care, laying groundwork that would be lost for centuries after the empire's fall. In the disciplined ranks of the legions, we see a different kind of power, the power of order, reason, and a relentless focus on saving lives in the most chaotic circumstances imaginable. But if the Roman medicus represents a turn towards organized, empirical battlefield medicine, then the legends that emerged from ancient India present a vision of healing's power turned to a far more sinister purpose. Here we encounter one of the most chilling and controversial whispers from the past, the enigmatic figure of the Vishkanya, or poisoned damsel. This was not a healer in any conventional sense, but rather a living weapon. According to lore, these were young girls selected and raised from infancy on a meticulously controlled diet of minute, gradually increasing doses of various poisons. The goal was to build an immunity so profound that their very bodies would become toxic. Their sweat, their saliva, even their breath was said to carry a lethal charge. They were the ultimate assassins, sent to eliminate kings and generals not with a blade, but with a seemingly innocent touch, a whispered word, or a shared cup of wine. We must first ask, how historically plausible is such a practice? The primary sources for the Vishkanya are not dry historical records, but rather ancient texts of statecraft and strategy, most famously the Arthashastra, attributed to the shrewd philosopher Chanakya around the 4th century before the Common Era. In this manual on how to acquire and maintain power, the Vishkanya is listed as just one of many potential tools in a ruler's arsenal of espionage and assassination. This context is crucial. The Arthashastra is a text that explores every conceivable method of realpolitik, from diplomacy to deception. The inclusion of the poisoned damsel suggests the idea was at least conceivable within the framework of ancient Indian toxicology, even if it existed more as a theoretical weapon of statecraft than a commonly deployed agent. From a scientific standpoint, the concept of building tolerance to certain poisons through gradual exposure, a process known as mithridatism, is absolutely valid. It is well documented with substances like arsenic or even snake venoms. However, achieving a state where one's bodily fluids become consistently poisonous to others through mere contact pushes against the limits of biological possibility. The body's primary function is to metabolize and excrete toxins, not to store and secrete them as a reliable weapon. The more fascinating question may not be whether such assassins truly existed, but what specific poisons this legend might be based upon. Ancient India possessed an incredibly sophisticated knowledge of botany, and its forests were filled with plants that could kill. A prime candidate is the aconite plant, often called monkshood or wolf's bane. Its roots contain aconitine, a potent neurotoxin that can be absorbed directly through the skin, causing numbness, paralysis, and cardiac arrest. Even a small amount handled improperly could be fatal. Another possibility is the seeds of the Strychnos nux vomica tree, the source of strychnine, a compound that causes violent, painful convulsions. A third, and perhaps the most symbolic, is the datura plant. Datura is a powerful deliriant causing fever, hallucinations, and amnesia. Its effects are unpredictable and terrifying. The use of such a substance aligns with the mythological aura of the Vishkanya. Her victim might not just die, but die in a state of confused terror, their final moments a mystery. The legend likely amalgamates the very real dangers of these and other toxins into the potent image of a single, beautiful, and deadly woman. This leads us to the deepest layer of this tale. What does the myth of the Vishkanya reveal about the ancient psyche? On one level, it is a story about the ultimate perversion of the healer's art. Ayurveda, the science of life, was all about using natural substances to balance and cure. The poison damsel represents its dark twin, the same profound knowledge of plants and their effects on the human body, but twisted to end life rather than preserve it. It speaks to an understanding that the line between medicine and poison is vanishingly thin, dependent entirely on dosage, intention, and application. A plant that can heal in a minute quantity can kill in a larger one. The Vishkanya is the personification of this dangerous duality. More profoundly, the legend is steeped in ancient anxieties about feminine power and the perceived mystery of the female body. In many cultures, female sexuality and reproductive power were seen as inherently potent, magical, and therefore dangerous if uncontrolled. The Vishkanya myth takes this latent cultural fear and weaponizes it literally. A beautiful woman, often the object of desire, becomes the vessel for a hidden, unstoppable toxicity. Her very allure is the bait in a deadly trap. This transforms a natural source of life and attraction into an instrument of death, reflecting deep-seated fears of betrayal, of the unknown within the familiar, and of a power that cannot be confronted directly on a battlefield. The poison damsel is not a warrior who faces her enemy. She is a subtle, unstoppable force that exploits intimacy and trust. In this way, the whispered tale of the Vishkanya is far more than a curious historical footnote. It is a dark mirror held up to ancient society, reflecting its sophisticated knowledge of toxins, its understanding of the healer's ambiguous power, and its deep, enduring fascination and fear of the feminine mystique. Moving from the legendary assassins of India to a tangible object pulled from the depths of the sea, we find a mystery that connects the heavens directly to the human body in a way that would have made perfect sense to an ancient healer. In the year 1901, sponge divers exploring a Roman-era shipwreck off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera made a discovery that would utterly redefine our understanding of ancient technology. Amidst statues and pottery, they recovered a lump of corroded bronze and wood that, upon careful examination, revealed itself to be the most sophisticated mechanical device known from the ancient world, the Antikythera mechanism. For decades, scientists have painstakingly studied its intricate arrangement of more than 30 meshing bronze gears, concluding it was a stunningly precise analog computer used to predict astronomical events such as solar eclipses and the positions of the planets. It has rightly been called the world's first computer. But what if its purpose was even more profound? What if this magnificent device was not only an astronomer's tool but also a crucial instrument in an ancient physician's kit used to harness the power of the stars for healing? To understand this possibility, we must fully embrace the ancient worldview, where a strict division between astronomy and medicine simply did not exist. The prevailing philosophy was one of cosmic sympathy, the belief that everything in the universe was interconnected. The macrocosm of the heavens was reflected in the microcosm of the human body. Just as the moon pulled the tides, it was believed to influence the fluids within us, the bodily humors. The positions of planets like Mars associated with heat and aggression, or Saturn, linked to cold and melancholy, were thought to directly impact a person's health and temperament. This school of thought, known as iatromathematics or medical astrology, was a serious science to figures like Hippocrates himself, who is often quoted as saying, "He who does not understand astrology is not a doctor but a fool." For a Greek or Roman physician-priest, diagnosing an illness was only half the battle. The critical second step was determining the most auspicious moment to intervene. Administering a remedy when the celestial influences were hostile could render it useless or even harmful, but applying a treatment when the stars were in perfect alignment could amplify its effects and ensure a successful outcome. This is where the Antikythera mechanism transforms from a simple calendar into a potential medical dashboard. Let us consider the practice of bloodletting, one of the most common procedures in ancient and medieval medicine. This was not a random act of desperation. It was a calculated intervention to rebalance the humors. According to complex astrological rules, bleeding a patient was strictly forbidden when the moon was in the zodiac sign associated with the part of the body to be treated. For instance, if the moon was in Gemini, which governed the arms, it was considered extremely dangerous to perform a bloodletting on the arm. The mechanism, with its dials that could track the moon's precise path through the zodiac in real time, would have given a healer the power to calculate these optimal and forbidden times with breathtaking accuracy, avoiding catastrophic errors. Similarly, the preparation of certain medicines, particularly those involving powerful herbs or mineral compounds, was governed by astrological timing. A potion meant to cool a fever might be most potent if brewed under the influence of the moon, while a tonic for strength might be prepared when the sun or Jupiter was dominant. The device could have told the physician exactly when to gather ingredients and compound his remedies for maximum effect. Perhaps the most compelling possibility involves the mechanism's ability to predict eclipses. In the ancient mind, an eclipse was a terrifying omen, a moment of profound cosmic imbalance. It was widely believed that disease outbreaks, particularly plagues and fevers, could be triggered or worsened by such celestial events. The Antikythera mechanism's eclipse prediction dial, which even included inscriptions about the wind directions expected during the event, could have served as an early warning system. A physician-priest consulting the device might foresee a period of celestial strife and advise his community to take preventative measures, or at least be prepared for an influx of illness. He could stockpile certain antidotes or reinforce public health measures. This transforms the mechanism from a reactive tool into a proactive one, a device for prognosticating public health crises based on the movements of the heavens. While no medical inscriptions have been found on the surviving fragments of the mechanism, its very complexity suggests it was designed for a user who needed a synthesized, holistic view of the cosmos. An astronomer might be content with star charts, but a healer whose decisions meant life or death needed to understand how all these celestial cycles, the 19-year Metonic calendar cycle, the Saros cycle of eclipses, the movements of the 5 known planets converged to influence the fragile human body. The Antikythera mechanism provided that unified theory in a beautiful mechanical form. It represents the ultimate expression of the ancient healer's quest for harmony, a tangible link between the grand clockwork of the universe and the intimate, urgent task of curing a single human being. In its meticulously engineered gears, we see the embodiment of a belief that to heal effectively, one must first learn to read the sky. And so we come to a figure whose personal obsession with poison would ultimately forge a legend that bridged the worlds of kingship, science, and sheer survival. In the turbulent 1st century before the Common Era, on the volatile shores of the Black Sea, ruled Mithridates VI, king of Pontus. His very name, Mithridates, meant gift of Mithra, the Persian god of oaths and the sun, but his life would become a dark testament to a different kind of power entirely. His story begins not on the throne but in the shadows of the palace as a young prince forced into hiding. The brutal truth of his court was that his own mother, in a ruthless bid for power, had plotted to murder him. This formative trauma ignited in Mithridates a lifelong, all-consuming paranoia that would define his reign. He became convinced that his eventual downfall would not come from a rival army, but from a sip of wine or a morsel of food delivered by a trusted hand. This fear, born of intimate betrayal, launched one of history's most extraordinary and prolonged scientific experiments, conducted on a single subject, himself. Mithridates resolved that he would never be a victim of the assassin's art. He turned his formidable intellect and royal resources toward a singular, audacious goal: to make himself invulnerable to poison. His method was as radical as it was simple, a principle we now know as Mithridatism, named in his honor. He began a regimen of self-administering tiny, sublethal doses of every known toxic substance. His private laboratories were a grim apothecary of the world's deadliest compounds. He would have experimented with the venom of vipers and scorpions, the deadly extracts of hemlock and aconite, the insidious powders of arsenic and lead. The process was a terrifying gamble, a high-wire act where the slightest miscalculation in dosage meant a painful, self-inflicted death. But through meticulous, incremental increases, he believed he was training his body, building a physiological fortress from the inside out. He was, in essence, attempting to create his own immunity, a concept that would not be formally understood for nearly 2 millennia. The legendary result of this lifelong trial was a complex compound known as mithridatum. This was not a single ingredient but a master formula, a potent mixture of dozens of antidotes blended together. Ancient sources suggest it contained over 50 ingredients, including chopped vipers for their antivenom properties, tiny amounts of the very poisons he sought to defy, and a vast array of herbs and spices like cinnamon, saffron, and myrrh, likely used to mask the dreadful taste and perhaps for their own perceived protective qualities. Mithridates was said to take a small amount daily, a ritualistic inoculation against the treachery he was certain awaited him. The formula was his most closely guarded state secret, a treasure more valuable than any crown jewel, and its exact composition was known only to him and perhaps his most trusted physicians. The ultimate test of his life's work came not from an assassin but from the legions of Rome. After decades of conflict, Mithridates was finally cornered by the Roman general Pompey. Facing capture and the humiliation of being paraded through the streets of Rome, the old king decided to take his own life. But in a final, cruel twist of irony, his legendary immunity betrayed him. He attempted suicide by poison, but the story goes that the dose, which would have been fatal to any other man, had no effect on his hardened constitution. In desperation, he was forced to command a loyal soldier to run him through with a sword. The man who had spent his entire life building a defense against poison died by the blade, his ultimate secret dying with him. But the legend of Mithridatum was only just beginning. After his defeat, the Romans, who were both fascinated and horrified by the king's reputation, scoured his possessions for the formula. While they may have found fragments or secondary accounts, the original, definitive recipe was lost. Yet, the idea of a universal antidote was too powerful to disappear. It captured the imagination of the Roman world and became the holy grail of toxicology. The most famous physician of the Roman Empire, Galen, who served the emperors Marcus Aurelius and Commodus, took up the challenge. He created his own version, known as Galene, or tranquility, which he claimed was based on the principles of Mithridates. Galen's formula became the standard antidote for centuries, a complex, expensive, and highly prestigious remedy reserved for emperors and the elite. Its prestige was such that it was still being prescribed in Europe well into the 19th century. The tale of Mithridates VI is a profound illustration of the thin, shifting line between poison and cure. His life's work, born from deep-seated fear, inadvertently pioneered the concept of immunization through controlled exposure. While his goal was personal survival, his method hinted at a fundamental biological truth that would later form the basis of modern immunology and even the science of allergy desensitization. He stands as a monumental, tragic figure, a paranoid king whose obsessive quest to defy death created a medical legend that outlasted his empire, forever blurring the boundaries between toxicology, pharmacology, and the enduring human desire to gain mastery over our own fragile bodies. While Mithridates sought to harden his body against external threats, another ancient civilization developed the extraordinary courage to intervene directly upon the body's most sacred vessel, the human skull. High in the Andes Mountains, the Inca and their predecessors mastered a surgical procedure so daring that it would challenge the skills of many modern surgeons. This was trepanation, the deliberate act of cutting or drilling a hole into the cranium. Across the highlands of Peru, archaeologists have unearthed thousands of ancient skulls bearing the unmistakable marks of these operations, and the evidence they reveal is nothing short of miraculous. What is truly staggering is not just that these procedures were performed, but the sheer number of patients who clearly survived them. We know this because when living bone is injured, it attempts to heal itself. On many of these skulls, we can see a smooth, new layer of bone called a callus growing around the edges of the opening. This is definitive proof that the individual lived for months and often years after their skull was surgically opened. The tools these surgeons used were as elegant as they were effective. Without the benefit of steel, they crafted razor-sharp blades from volcanic glass known as obsidian. Obsidian can be knapped to an edge far finer than even the best surgical steel, making it ideal for making precise incisions through the scalp and the bone beneath. For the more laborious task of scraping away the bone itself, they used handheld implements called tumis, often made of bronze or gold, which had a curved, semi-lunar blade. The procedure itself was a testament to their skill and understanding. After carefully cutting through the scalp and pulling it back, the surgeon would begin the painstaking work on the skull itself. They employed several techniques. Some would carve a rectangular or circular groove, deepening it until a plug of bone could be lifted out. Others would drill a series of small holes in a circle and then connect them, and some simply scraped the bone away until an opening was achieved. Crucially, they seemed to understand the need to avoid the delicate membranes protecting the brain, working with a controlled depth to penetrate the skull without causing catastrophic damage to the tissue beneath. But why would they perform such a radical operation? The reasons were likely as practical as they were profound. One of the most common causes would have been severe head trauma. In a society where intertribal warfare was frequent and weapons like slingshots could deliver crushing blows to the head, a fractured skull was a common injury. Such an injury can cause a dangerous buildup of blood and fluid between the skull and the brain, a condition known as a subdural hematoma. This pooling blood creates immense pressure, leading to debilitating headaches, paralysis, loss of consciousness, and ultimately, death. By trepanning the skull, the surgeon was effectively performing an emergency craniotomy, creating a release valve for that pressure and saving the patient's life. This suggests an advanced observational understanding of the link between cranial pressure and neurological symptoms. Beyond treating physical trauma, it is also highly probable that trepanation was used to address what we would now classify as mental or neurological illnesses. The ancient Andean peoples, like many cultures, may have viewed conditions like epilepsy, severe psychosis, or persistent migraines as the work of evil spirits trapped within the head. The logical remedy was to create an opening, a literal escape route for these malicious entities to leave the body. In this sense, the procedure was both a physical and a spiritual intervention, a powerful act of healing that addressed the perceived root cause of the affliction. This dual purpose highlights a holistic view where a physical action could have profound metaphysical consequences. The success rate of these operations, given the era, is astounding. Studies of large collections of trep and skulls suggest that well over half of the patients survived the procedure. Some individuals were trep and multiple times with several healed holes on their skulls, indicating they not only survived once but returned for further treatment. This level of success points to more than just manual dexterity. It implies a sophisticated knowledge of post-operative care and hygiene. While we have no written records of their methods, we can infer that these surgeons must have developed effective ways to control bleeding, prevent infection, and manage pain. They likely used local anesthetics from the rich Andean pharmacopoeia, perhaps coca leaves or other plants with numbing properties. The cleanliness of their tools, sterilized perhaps in fire or alcohol-based solutions, would have been critical to preventing the infections that would have otherwise been a death sentence. The story of Inca trepanation is therefore not one of mysterious magic, but of remarkable empirical science, born from careful observation, incredible courage, and a deep-seated determination to preserve life by venturing into the most forbidden territory of all, the human mind itself. Now let's circle back to those serene Greek healing sanctuaries, to a symbol that might seem utterly contradictory to the modern eye, the serpent. In the peaceful gardens of the Asclepion, patients seeking a cure would have encountered this creature not with fear but with profound reverence. Why would an animal we instinctively associate with venom and danger become the universal emblem of healing? The answer lies in a powerful ancient observation: the snake's ability to shed its entire skin. To the Greeks, this was the ultimate act of regeneration, a visible, miraculous rebirth. The serpent emerged from its old self, glistening and new, symbolizing the very essence of what every patient desperately sought to slough off their sickness and be restored to health. It represented cyclical renewal, the promise that the body, like the snake, possessed an innate capacity for transformation and recovery. But the symbolism runs even deeper, touching on that ancient understanding of duality we've seen elsewhere. The serpent embodies the razor-thin line between poison and cure. Its bite could bring swift death, yet its very essence, its venom, when understood and used with extreme precision, held the potential to become a powerful medicine. This concept was not lost on the Greeks. They recognized that the same force that could destroy life could, in minute, controlled amounts, stimulate healing, reduce pain, or act as an antidote. The serpent of Asclepius, therefore, was not a denial of danger, but a masterful integration of it. It stood as a constant reminder to the healer that their art was one of delicate balance, requiring a deep respect for the powerful, and sometimes deadly, forces of nature that could be harnessed for good. This ancient symbol did not fade away with the marble of the Asclepians. It made an astonishing journey through millennia to become one of the most recognized professional logos on Earth, the Rod of Asclepius. This is the correct symbol of medicine, a single, non-winged serpent entwined around a rough-hewn staff. You see it on the badges of paramedics, on the doors of hospitals, and on the insignia of medical associations worldwide. Its adoption was a conscious choice to connect the modern practice of medicine to its ancient roots, to that holistic ideal of healing the whole person in an environment of hope. The staff itself is thought to represent the traveling physician, a wanderer who would lean on it as he journeyed from village to village offering his skills. The serpent coiled around it signifies the healing power he carries. Yet there is a widespread and telling mix-up that reveals how easily ancient whispers can get distorted. Many people, particularly in the United States, mistakenly use a different symbol, the caduceus. This is the staff of the Greek god Hermes, the messenger of the gods and, significantly, the guide of souls to the underworld. The caduceus features two snakes entwined around a winged staff. While it's an elegant symbol, its original associations have almost nothing to do with healing. Hermes was a trickster god, a patron of commerce, thieves, and eloquence. The confusion likely began in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when military medical corps, perhaps drawn to the wings as a symbol of speed or misinterpreting its classical origins, began using the caduceus on insignia. From there, its use spread, especially in commercial and organizational contexts. The irony is profound. The true symbol of medicine, the rod of Asclepius, represents a dedicated, holistic calling focused on life. The often misused caduceus, linked to commerce and the afterlife, carries a very different, if unintended, message. This persistence of the serpent, whether in its correct or confused form, is a remarkable testament to the endurance of ancient ideas. It shows that the core concepts developed in those sacred groves, renewal, the balance of opposing forces, the healer's journey, resonated so deeply that they transcended the fall of empires. The symbol outlived the language, the gods, and the specific practices of the people who created it. When a doctor today looks at that serpent-entwined staff, they are unconsciously connecting with a lineage that stretches back over 2,000 years to a time when healing was an act of faith in nature's power to renew itself. It is a silent whisper from the past, a reminder that their profession is about more than just biology. It is about facilitating the fundamental, miraculous process of restoration that the ancient Greeks saw embodied in the simple, shedding skin of a snake. This journey through the world of ancient healing leads us now to a small, unassuming town in northern Italy, where a farmer, ploughing his field in the late 19th century, unearthed an object that seemed to speak a language of pure mystery. It was a bronze model about the size of a human hand, shaped with astonishing anatomical precision. It was not a sculpture of a god or a hero, but a perfect replica of a sheep's liver. This is the famed liver of Piacenza, and it is one of the most remarkable and direct windows we have into the spiritual and medical mind of the Etruscan people, the sophisticated civilization that thrived in Italy long before Rome became an empire. The surface of this bronze organ is not smooth. It is divided into dozens of tiny compartments, each meticulously labeled with the names of Etruscan deities. This was not an artistic curiosity. It was a training manual, a sacred map of the cosmos, and a diagnostic tool all fused into one. For the Etruscans, and later adopted by the Romans, the practice of reading these divine signs was known as haruspicy, and its master was the haruspex, a seer priest whose authority came from his ability to interpret the will of the gods. Their core belief was a profound one, that the universe was a single, interconnected whole. The macrocosm, the entire cosmos with its gods and planets, was perfectly reflected in the microcosm of a single, living creature. And of all the organs, the liver was considered the most significant. It was seen as the seat of life itself, the center of blood production, and therefore the home of the soul and emotions. In a living sacrifice, usually a sheep, the haruspex believed the animal's liver became a snapshot of the current state of the world. Any imperfection, any unusual mark or discoloration on that liver was not a random flaw. It was a direct message, a divine commentary on everything from the fate of a nation to the health of a single individual who had come seeking a cure. Imagine the scene of a healing ritual. A patient suffering from a persistent, unexplained illness would approach the haruspex. The priest would perform a sacrifice, carefully removing the liver and placing it on a special stand. He would then consult his bronze model, the liver of Piacenza, which acted as his celestial guide. Each section of the model corresponded to a specific region of the sky, ruled by a particular god. The right side might be associated with favorable gods, the left with more threatening ones. The haruspex would compare the actual liver to this ideal divine map. Was a lobe discolored or misshapen? Did he find a cyst or an unusual spot in the quadrant belonging to the god Tinia, the Etruscan equivalent of Jupiter? That would be a critical clue. Such a mark could indicate that the patient's illness was a direct result of having offended that specific deity. The diagnosis, therefore, was not just a physical one, it was a spiritual audit, identifying precisely which cosmic relationship had been broken and was manifesting as sickness in the body. This reading would then dictate the entire course of treatment. The cure was not a herbal remedy in isolation, but a meticulously prescribed ritual designed to appease the angered god. The prescription might involve making a specific offering, reciting a particular prayer, or performing an act of atonement. The ailment and its treatment were inextricably linked to the divine message found in the liver's markings. This practice represents a unique and sophisticated blend of empirical observation and deep spirituality. The haruspex was a master anatomist. He had to have an intimate knowledge of a normal, healthy liver to be able to spot the slightest anomaly. Yet he interpreted those physical observations through a spiritual lens, seeing the body of his patient as a landscape where cosmic battles were fought and resolved. The liver of Piacenza, with its inscribed divine names, was the key that unlocked the meaning of those bodily landscapes, turning a priest into a physician and a sacrifice into a medical consultation. But as we move forward in time from the ancient world into the shadowy forests of medieval Europe, the delicate balance between revered healer and feared outsider began to tip catastrophically. The landscape of healing transformed into one of suspicion and terror, where the very knowledge that once sustained a community could become a death sentence. In the small, isolated villages that dotted the countryside, professional physicians were a rarity, a luxury for nobles and kings. For the common people, healthcare came from a much more local source, the cunning folk. These were the wise women and men who lived on the edges of the village, individuals who possessed a deep, generational understanding of the plants that grew in the nearby woods and meadows. They were the midwives who delivered babies, the bone setters who mended fractures, and the herbalists who prepared poultices for wounds and teas for fevers. Their pharmacopoeia was the land itself, willow bark for pain, later understood to contain a form of salicylic acid, the precursor to aspirin, foxglove for heart ailments, which would centuries later give us digitalis, and chamomile for rest and digestion. Their power was not derived from ancient texts or institutional learning, but from careful observation, trial and error, and an oral tradition passed from mother to daughter, from father to son. They operated in a world where the spiritual and the physical were still deeply entwined. A healing chant or a protective charm might be woven into the administration of a remedy, not as sinister magic, but as a way to bolster the patient's hope and the healer's intention. This long-standing, vital role began to crumble under the weight of two powerful, converging forces: the rise of formal medical institutions and the increasing political dominance of the Church. Starting around the 12th and 13th centuries, universities in places like Bologna, Paris, and Montpellier began establishing faculties of medicine. For the first time, the title of doctor was becoming a credentialed academic profession, almost exclusively reserved for men from certain social classes who could afford a lengthy Latin education. These university-trained physicians based their practice on the classical theories of Humer's and Galenic principles, often involving complex procedures like bloodletting and purging. They looked upon the practical, plant-based cures of the village healer with outright disdain, viewing them as the superstitious work of ignorant peasants. This created a professional rivalry, an intellectual turf war where the established medical elite had a vested interest in discrediting their unlicensed competition. Simultaneously, the Church was undergoing a profound shift. The period of the Inquisitions and the subsequent witch trials saw the consolidation of religious power and a rigid definition of orthodoxy. Any spiritual practice that existed outside the strict control of the church hierarchy was increasingly viewed as a threat. The village healer's methods, which might include appeals to local spirits or the use of protective symbols that predated Christianity, were now reinterpreted through a lens of demonology. What was once seen as folk tradition or simple charming became evidence of a pact with the devil. The very effectiveness of their cures was turned against them. If a wise woman's salve healed a wound that a physician's bleeding had failed to cure, it wasn't proof of her skill with herbs. It was seen as demonic trickery, a sinister illusion meant to lure souls away from God. The Church propagated the idea that all magical power, even that which appeared to do good, ultimately came from Satan. This created a deadly paradox. The more successful a folk healer was, the more likely they were to be accused of witchcraft. This toxic fusion of professional jealousy and religious paranoia ignited the flames of the witch trials, which swept across Europe and into the American colonies for centuries. The accusations often followed a grimly predictable pattern. A local cunning person would have a falling out with a neighbor, perhaps after a cure failed or a payment was disputed. Or a prominent figure in the community might fall ill and die despite the healer's best efforts. In a time of unexplained misfortune, a crop failure, a child's sudden death, a livestock illness, the community's fear and grief sought a scapegoat. The independent, often elderly woman who lived alone and possessed strange knowledge became the perfect target. Under torture, accused individuals were forced to confess to fantastical crimes, and their herbal knowledge was twisted into proof of their diabolism. A flying ointment made from psychoactive plants like belladonna and henbane, which may have been used in rituals to induce trance-like visions, was presented in court as a literal recipe for flying to satanic sabbaths. The compassionate act of providing a potion to ease the pain of childbirth could be reframed as a malicious attempt to cause infertility or harm the unborn child. The trials were not just about punishing individuals, they were a systematic campaign to eradicate an entire competing system of knowledge and community-based power. The result was the tragic loss of countless lives, predominantly women, and the irrevocable destruction of vast stores of herbal wisdom that had been cultivated over generations, silencing the whispers of these ancient healers in the most brutal way imaginable. Yet even as these ancient whispers of spiritual diagnosis and brutal surgery echoed through the centuries, a new kind of healer was emerging from the heart of the Islamic Golden Age, one whose methods would lay the foundation for the modern scientific approach to medicine. In the bustling intellectual capital of 9th century Baghdad, a city that served as the vibrant crossroads of the known world, a Persian polymath named Abu Bakr al-Razi, known in the West as Razes, was forging a path of rigorous observation and reason that would change the course of medical history. Al-Razi was a towering figure, a man of immense curiosity who authored over 200 books on subjects ranging from alchemy to philosophy, but it is in his medical work that his genius truly shines. He served as the chief physician of the great hospital in Baghdad, and from this vantage point he championed a revolutionary idea that medical knowledge should advance not by slavishly following the texts of the ancients, but through direct, meticulous observation of the patient and the disease itself. His most enduring contribution to clinical practice was his brilliant and systematic differentiation between two of the most feared diseases of his era, smallpox and measles. At the time, these devastating illnesses were often confused, grouped together as a single, terrible plague. But Al-Razi, with the eye of a master detective, noticed crucial distinctions. He documented that smallpox typically presented with a more intense backache and a higher fever before the rash even appeared. He carefully described how the smallpox pustules themselves were deeper, more uniform, and often left the scarring pockmarks that gave the disease its name, while the measles rash was more superficial and splotchy. By publishing these precise observations in his treatise on smallpox and measles, he gave physicians a clear diagnostic tool for the first time. This was not just an academic exercise, it was a matter of life and death, as the prognosis and management for each disease differed significantly. This work stands as a monumental achievement in descriptive medicine, a testament to his belief that careful, first-hand observation was the physician's most powerful tool. Al-Razi's commitment to this empirical method extended to the most vulnerable patients, children. He authored the first comprehensive book dedicated solely to pediatrics, titled The Diseases of Children. In it, he moved beyond the common perception of children as merely small adults, recognizing that they have unique anatomies, physiologies, and susceptibilities. He offered practical advice on everything from breastfeeding and weaning to treating childhood infections and dealing with teething pain. His approach was remarkably compassionate and practical, emphasizing the importance of a gentle touch and a calm demeanor when dealing with young, frightened patients. This specialized focus on pediatric care was virtually unprecedented and demonstrated a holistic understanding of health that spanned the entire human lifespan. But perhaps the most telling story of Al-Razi's innovative spirit involves not a medical text, but a simple, brilliant experiment in public health. According to historical accounts, when he was tasked with selecting the site for a new grand hospital in Baghdad, he rejected conventional wisdom. Instead of choosing a location based on convenience or prestige, he devised a strikingly empirical test. He had fresh pieces of meat hung in various potential locations across the city. He then observed and compared the rates at which the meat spoiled in each spot. The location where the meat remained fresh the longest, he reasoned, would have the cleanest air and the most wholesome environment, making it the ideal place for the sick to recover. This story, whether entirely literal or partly allegorical, perfectly captures the essence of Al-Razi's philosophy. It shows a mind tirelessly seeking evidence, using practical experimentation to make critical decisions that would affect countless lives. He was intuitively understanding the role of environmental factors long before the germ theory of disease was established. This principled approach was cemented in his ethical writings. Al-Razi was a fierce advocate for intellectual honesty and humility in the medical profession. He openly criticized the unqualified and those who placed profit over patient care. In his writings, he emphasized the limits of medical knowledge and the importance of admitting when a cure was beyond a physician's power, arguing that it was far better to be truthful than to offer false hope with ineffective treatments. He believed the physician's primary duty was to alleviate suffering, and that this required not only skill but also profound compassion and integrity. Through his groundbreaking clinical work, his pioneering focus on children, and his unwavering ethical compass, Al-Razi became a beacon of enlightened medicine. He successfully fused the accumulated knowledge of the Greeks, Persians, and Indians that flowed into Baghdad with his own relentless empiricism, creating a legacy that would guide and inspire physicians for centuries to come. Of all the plants that feature in the whispered tales of ancient healers, few capture the imagination and the fear quite like the mandrake, with its thick, often forked root that bears an uncanny resemblance to a human form. Complete with what looks like limbs and a head, the mandrake was never seen as just another herb. It was a being, a subterranean spirit with a will of its own, and its power was so immense that harvesting it was considered a life-threatening ritual. Ancient texts from across Europe and the Mediterranean are filled with grave warnings. It was said that when pulled from the earth, the mandrake would let out a piercing, supernatural scream. This was no mere sound, it was a weapon. According to the law, hearing this shriek could strike a person dead on the spot, or at the very least, plunge them into incurable madness. This belief was so pervasive that it dictated an incredibly elaborate and cautious harvesting method, one that placed an animal as a sacrificial buffer between the healer and the root's lethal voice. The preferred technique, described in detail by writers like the Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder, was a scene of macabre theater. The herbalist would approach the mandrake plant not at noon, but in the twilight hours, often with a dog that had been starved for a day to make it more eager for a reward. The healer would carefully loosen the soil around the root but would not touch it directly. Instead, they would tie one end of a rope to the base of the plant and the other end to the dog's collar. Then, standing at a safe distance, the healer would throw a piece of meat just beyond the dog's reach. The hungry animal would lunge for the food, yanking the mandrake root from the ground with a sudden, violent pull. As the root was torn free, it would unleash its deadly scream, killing the dog instantly. Only then, with the curse expended, could the healer safely retrieve the now powerful but silent root. This ritual underscores the profound danger and sacred value attributed to the plant. A life was exchanged for the potent medicine, but why go to such extreme length? The answer lies in the very real and powerful chemical compounds within the mandrake, which belongs to the nightshade family. The root is packed with a cocktail of tropane alkaloids, including scopolamine, hyoscyamine, and atropine. In modern terms, these are potent anticholinergics, meaning they block certain neurotransmitters in the nervous system. In controlled minute doses, these compounds can act as incredibly effective sedatives, painkillers, and even anesthetics. There is strong evidence that ancient surgeons, particularly the Romans, used mandrake extracts to sedate patients before performing amputations or other painful procedures. The Greek physician Dioscorides even described a wine of the mandrake used to induce a deep sleep for surgery. Furthermore, in slightly higher doses, these same alkaloids are powerful hallucinogens, which would have made the mandrake a key ingredient in the flying ointments and potions used by shamans and seers to journey into trance states and commune with the spirit world. This duality is what makes the mandrake such a perfect symbol of ancient healing. Its terrifying myth was wrapped around a kernel of potent scientific truth. The scream that could kill a man was a supernatural explanation for a very real physiological danger. Handling the fresh root improperly could lead to the absorption of these alkaloids through the skin, causing dizziness, rapid heartbeat, delirium, and respiratory failure symptoms that could easily be interpreted as being struck by a magical curse. The plant's human-like shape, a coincidence of nature, cemented its status as a magical being, leading to its use in all manner of folk magic as a talisman for protection, fertility, and wealth. The story of the mandrake is the story of ancient medicine in a single, gnarled root, a profound respect for nature's power, a brilliant, if intuitive, understanding of plant-based pharmacology, and a worldview where every cure carried a potential curse and where the line between healer and magician was forever blurred. But what if the single greatest tragedy in the history of medicine was not the loss of a person, but the burning of a building? This brings us to a haunting question that has echoed for centuries. What exactly was lost when the great library of Alexandria was destroyed? More than just a repository of scrolls, it was the collective brain of the ancient world, a place where for the first and perhaps only time in antiquity, the entire sum of human knowledge from Babylon, Persia, India, and beyond was gathered under one roof with the explicit purpose of understanding everything. And within its vast collections, housed in the Mausoleum or Temple of the Muses, was a medical section of unimaginable scope. We can only speculate on the treasures it contained, but the fragments that survive point to a medical science that was, in some areas, frighteningly advanced. To grasp the magnitude of the loss, we need to understand the library's grand ambition. The Ptolemaic kings of Egypt, successors to Alexander the Great, were obsessed with collecting every known book. They dispatched agents to every port, purchasing scrolls from every merchant and ship's captain. Incoming vessels were searched, and any scrolls found were confiscated, copied by the library's scribes, and then, in a move of ruthless dedication, the copies were returned to the owners while the originals were added to the library's permanent collection. This was a project of breathtaking intellectual imperialism. Within its walls, you would have found not only the works of Greek luminaries like Hippocrates, but also the entire medical corpus of the Etruscans, the precise astronomical and surgical texts of the Babylonians, the holistic philosophies of Ayurveda from India, and perhaps even the first translations of Chinese medical theories on Qi and meridians. This was a global conversation about the human body that was silenced before it could truly begin. The true horror of the library's destruction is that it was not a single catastrophic event, but a slow, agonizing death by 1,000 cuts. There was the accidental fire during Julius Caesar's civil war in 48 before the Common Era, which likely damaged warehouses of scrolls near the docks. Then came periods of neglect and deliberate purges under Christian emperors targeting pagan texts, and finally the decisive blow during the Muslim conquest in the 7th century. With each incident, untold numbers of unique works vanished forever. The real tragedy is that we don't even possess a complete catalogue of what was there. We only have references and quotations in the works of later scholars who were lucky enough to have accessed the library before its final demise. It is like knowing a magnificent symphony was composed, but only hearing a few scattered notes that survived. One of the most tantalizing glimpses into the library's advanced medical culture comes from the figure of Herophilus of Chalcedon, who worked in Alexandria during its 3rd century Golden Age. Herophilus was a revolutionary because he had a unique advantage granted by the Ptolemaic rulers: permission to perform dissections and even vivisections on condemned criminals. This was a practice considered abhorrent elsewhere in the Greek world, but in Alexandria's atmosphere of intense scientific inquiry it was allowed. Herophilus's discoveries were staggering. He was the first to distinguish clearly between sensory nerves and motor nerves, understanding that one carried signals to the brain and the other carried commands away from it. He meticulously described the anatomy of the eye, the liver, and the reproductive organs. Most astonishingly, he identified the brain itself as the seat of human intelligence, the center of the nervous system, overturning the Aristotelian belief that the heart was the core of thought and feeling. He even named parts of the brain, like the torcular herophily, a term still used in neuroanatomy today. But here is the crushing thought: the scrolls that contained Herophilus's detailed observations, his illustrated anatomical texts, are all gone. We know of his discoveries only because later physicians like Galen mentioned them, often to disagree. What other profound truths did he document that were too radical for later generations to even reference? Did he map the circulatory system in more detail than we realize? Did he understand the concept of neurons? The library would have held not just his final conclusions, but his working notes, his failed hypotheses, the entire messy, brilliant process of his scientific journey. The loss of that process is as devastating as the loss of the conclusions themselves. Beyond anatomy, imagine the pharmacological knowledge that vanished. The library would have contained herbals from every corner of the known world, describing plants from the misty forests of Germania to the sweltering coasts of India. A scroll might have detailed an effective treatment for malaria from a South Asian plant that was forgotten and had to be rediscovered millennia later. Another might have contained precise compounding instructions for analgesics or antiseptics that were lost, leading to centuries of unnecessary suffering. The library was a hub for trade routes. Its pharmacists would have been comparing notes on the properties of opium, cannabis, and countless other substances, creating a global pharmacopoeia that was incinerated. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria represents the ultimate what-if of medical history. It wasn't just a building that burned, it was a potential future that was erased. It set back the progress of medicine by over 1,000 years, forcing later generations to painfully and slowly rediscover truths that Alexandrian scholars had already documented. The whispers of those ancient healers, the Hierophilises and their colleagues, were not just silenced, their very language was forgotten. We are left with the chilling realization that our modern understanding of the body is not a continuous line of progress, but a broken path, one that had to be rebuilt from the ashes of a library whose greatest secrets we will never know. Yet, even as we ponder the grand libraries and complex surgeries of the ancient world, it is perhaps the most humble, and to our modern sensibilities, the most revolting of creatures that offers one of the most striking examples of ancient intuition aligning with cutting-edge science. We are talking about the deliberate, medicinal use of maggots and leeches. The very idea seems to belong to a dark chapter of medieval history, a relic of a time when medical ignorance led to desperate, grotesque measures. But walk into a modern wound care center today, and you might just find these ancient practitioners hard at work, not as a sign of desperation, but as a testament to a wisdom we are only now fully appreciating. Long before we understood germ theory or biochemistry, healers across the globe observed something remarkable in nature. From the Maya in the steamy jungles of Central America to physicians on the battlefields of Napoleonic Europe, there were accounts of soldiers or hunters with severe, festering wounds. When these wounds became infested with maggots, the larvae of flies, a curious thing often happened. While the situation looked horrifying, the patient, against all odds, would sometimes survive. The infection would clear, the horrific smell of rotting flesh would fade, and the wound would begin to heal. These ancient observers noticed a pattern. The maggots seemed to be consuming the dead, putrid tissue while leaving the healthy, living flesh untouched. It was a brilliant, if unsettling, form of natural surgery. They didn't know why it worked, but the evidence of their own eyes was compelling enough. They began to harness this process intentionally, applying certain types of flies to wounds to prevent gangrene and save limbs, even lives. The scientific rationale behind this practice, known today as maggot debridement therapy, is as elegant as it is effective. Not every maggot is suitable for the job. The preferred species is the larvae of the green bottle fly. These maggots are meticulous eaters. They secrete digestive enzymes that liquefy dead, necrotic tissue, which they then consume. Crucially, they have no interest in healthy tissue, but their value goes far beyond being mere scavengers. Their secretions are naturally antibacterial, capable of killing even the dreaded MRSA superbug. Furthermore, they stimulate the wound bed, encouraging the growth of new, healthy tissue and improving blood flow to the area. In modern hospitals, these medical-grade maggots are bred in sterile laboratories to ensure they carry no pathogens. They are applied to wounds, particularly diabetic ulcers, post-surgical infections, and severe burns, that have proven resistant to antibiotics. The maggots work with a precision that no surgeon's scalpel can match, meticulously cleaning the wound and creating the ideal conditions for the body to finally heal itself. The same astonishing comeback story is true for the leech. For centuries, bloodletting was a cornerstone of Western medicine, based on the humoral theory of balancing bodily fluids. While much of this practice was misguided and often harmful, the application of leeches was, in specific circumstances, inadvertently beneficial. Ancient healers, from the physicians of ancient Egypt to Ayurvedic practitioners in India, used leeches to relieve a sense of fullness or inflammation. They sensed that in conditions like localized swelling or bruising, removing some blood could bring relief. What they couldn't have known is that the real magic wasn't in the blood being removed, but in the chemical cocktail the leech injects while it feeds. A leech bite is virtually painless because its saliva contains a powerful anesthetic, but more importantly, it contains over 100 different bioactive compounds, the most famous of which is a potent anticoagulant called hirudin. Hirudin prevents blood from clotting, which allows the leech to feed for a long time. But when used therapeutically, this same compound is a miracle of microsurgery. Imagine a surgeon reattaching a severed finger. The arteries which carry blood into the finger can be sewn back together relatively easily, but the tiny veins which are responsible for draining the blood out are much more difficult to reconnect. Without proper drainage, blood pools in the reattached part, creating congestion swelling that cuts off circulation and causes the tissue to die. This is where the leech becomes a lifesaver. By attaching a leech to the fingertip, it gently sucks out the excess, stagnant blood. The continuous flow encouraged by the hirudin in its saliva prevents clotting, buying precious time for the patient's own veins to gradually reconnect and establish proper drainage. The leech is not just removing blood, it is acting as a temporary external venous system, a living, breathing medical device that keeps the tissue alive. The journey of these two creatures from the domain of folk healers and battlefield surgeons to the sterilized environment of a modern ICU is a powerful lesson. It teaches us that ancient practices, even those that seem bizarre or primitive, were often based on sharp, empirical observation. Our ancestors may have lacked our scientific vocabulary, but they were brilliant naturalists. They saw solutions in the world around them and had the courage to experiment. The resurgence of maggot and leech therapy is not a step backward into superstition. It is a step forward into a more nuanced understanding of biology, one that acknowledges the incredible power of nature's own pharmacy. It is a profound reminder that sometimes the most advanced medicine involves humbly partnering with the simplest of organisms, recognizing that their ancient wisdom can still guide our modern hands. This journey through the whispers of ancient healers reveals a profound truth. Their power was as much about understanding the human condition as it was about mastering plants and rituals. Yet sometimes the most enduring medical legacies are not those that healed, but those that inflicted a different kind of harm, pathologizing normal human experiences under the guise of science. Perhaps no concept demonstrates this darker side more starkly than the long, troubling history of hysteria. This was not a discovery carved into a surgical tool or written in an herbal. It was a diagnosis born from a fundamental misunderstanding of the female body, one that would echo through the corridors of medicine for over 2,000 years. To find its origins, we must return to the world of the Egyptian SWNW and the papyrus scrolls that recorded their knowledge. Among the oldest surviving medical documents is the Kahun gynecological papyrus, dating back to around 1800 years before the Common Era. This text, while offering practical advice for concerns like fertility and contraception, also presents a theory that would have devastating consequences. It describes a condition believed to be caused by the uterus itself displacing from its proper position. The ancient Egyptians conceived of the womb not as a static organ, but as a free-moving entity within the body, capable of traveling to other areas. When it wandered, they thought, it could press against other organs, most notably the heart and lungs, causing a sensation of suffocation, anxiety, and a host of other vague but distressing symptoms. The proposed cures were aimed at coaxing the womb back to its correct location, often through the use of strong-smelling substances. A woman might be instructed to inhale pleasant fragrances to attract the womb downward, or foul odors placed near her pelvis to repel it from her chest. This idea, while rooted in the anatomical ignorance of the time, established a dangerous precedent. It located the cause of a woman's suffering squarely within her own reproductive system, framing it as an inherent instability of her biology. This concept was not confined to Egypt. It was adopted and elaborated upon by the great philosophical minds of ancient Greece, who gave it a name and a more elaborate theoretical framework. In Plato's dialogue Timaeus, he describes the womb as a living creature within a woman, an animal desirous of childbearing. When this animal remained barren for too long, Plato theorized, it became distressed and would wander recklessly through the body, obstructing passages, hindering breathing, and causing immense suffering. The Greek term for womb is hystera, and from this the condition became known as hysteric penix, or suffocation of the womb. This belief transformed a speculative Egyptian idea into a core tenet of classical medicine, endorsed by figures like Hippocrates and Galen. For them, the symptoms of hysteria were vast and nonspecific: anxiety, irritability, nervousness, fainting spells, insomnia, fluid retention, and a feeling of heaviness in the abdomen. Any complaint that did not fit a clear, observable pattern could be conveniently categorized under this sprawling diagnosis. The profound tragedy of the wandering womb theory is how it was used to systematically dismiss and control women's very real medical conditions. A woman experiencing what we might now recognize as a panic attack, a thyroid disorder, clinical depression, or the effects of trauma was told her problem was a rebellious uterus. Her pain was not investigated, it was explained away by a mythological cause. This diagnosis became a powerful tool of social control, reinforcing the idea that women were, by their very nature, emotionally and physically volatile. A woman's legitimate anger, grief, or dissent could be medicalized and invalidated as merely a symptom of her hysterical nature. The prescribed treatments often focused on restoring what was seen as the womb's primary function, marriage and motherhood. The ultimate cure was frequently considered to be sexual intercourse within marriage and pregnancy, tying a woman's health directly to her compliance with social norms. This ancient misconception proved astonishingly resilient, persisting well into the 19th and even 20th centuries. The term hysteria became a catch-all diagnosis in asylum and clinic records, a label applied to women who defied easy categorization. The invention of the vibrator in the late 19th century, ironically, was not for pleasure but as a medical device to treat hysteria through pelvic massage to induce hysterical paroxysm or orgasm, which physicians believed would relieve the symptoms. The ghost of the wandering womb haunted generations of women, preventing serious investigation into conditions like endometriosis, polycystic ovary syndrome, and a host of autoimmune diseases. It wasn't until the late 20th century that hysteria was finally removed from official diagnostic manuals, though its legacy lingers in the tendency to dismiss women's pain as emotional or exaggerated. The story of hysteria is a stark reminder that medicine is not just a science of facts, but also a reflection of the culture that creates it, and that some of the most persistent ailments are not found in the body of the patient, but in the biases of the healer. While Roman Medici were developing their battlefield trauma centers and Mithridates was obsessively tasting poisons on the other side of the world, in the fertile plains of the Yellow River Valley, a very different form of diagnosis was being perfected, one that left a permanent record etched not in flesh but in bone. Here, during the Shang dynasty over 3,000 years ago, the act of understanding illness was a sacred conversation, a direct line of communication with the unseen world. The primary tool for this dialogue was something that might seem utterly mundane: the shoulder bone of an ox or the flat underside of a turtle shell. These were the famous oracle bones, and the inscriptions carved into them represent the very dawn of Chinese writing. But for the Shang kings and their priest healers, these bones were far more than a writing surface. They were a spiritual hotline, a medical scanner for the soul. The process was a meticulous ritual charged with solemn purpose. When a king or a noble fell ill, the event was not seen as a random biological misfortune. It was a sign, a message from the spirit realm that something was deeply wrong in the cosmic order. the responsibility fell to a specialized class of diviners who were part scribe, part priest, and part diagnostician. They would prepare the bone or shell by polishing it smooth and then carefully carving a series of shallow pits onto the back. Next, they would inscribe the burning question directly onto the surface, using a sharp tool to etch characters in the ancient script. The questions were remarkably direct and clinical in their phrasing, despite their spiritual context. A typical inscription might read, "The king has a toothache. Is it because ancestors so and so is causing it? Or, we will perform a ritual sacrifice of 3 cattle and 5 prisoners to ancestor so and so. Will the king recover?" With the question formally posed, the diviner would apply intense heat to one of the prepared pits using a red-hot metal rod. The bone, under this thermal stress, would crack with a sharp pop. The pattern of these cracks, their length, their direction, their intersection was believed to be the coded answer from the ancestors or the high god. The diviner, trained in this esoteric art, would then read the cracks like a physician reading an X-ray. A certain pattern might confirm that the illness was indeed the work of a specific displeased ancestor. Another pattern might suggest that the proposed remedy, a particular sacrifice, would be acceptable and lead to a recovery. The final verdict, and sometimes even the eventual outcome, would often be carved right there on the bone, creating a permanent medical record of the diagnosis, the prescribed spiritual treatment, and its result. What these bones reveal is a world view where health was inseparable from harmonious relationships with the past. The most common cause of royal illness, according to the inscriptions, was the anger of a deceased ancestor. Perhaps a sacrifice had been neglected, a ritual performed incorrectly, or a moral law broken. The ancestor, feeling dishonored, would express their displeasure by afflicting the living king with sickness. The cure, therefore, was not herbal but relational. The prescribed remedy was almost always an act of appeasement, the offering of valuable bronzes, fine wine, or on a larger scale, the sacrifice of animals or even human prisoners of war. The goal was to restore balance and honor, to soothe the offended spirit so that it would cease its punishment. This practice demonstrates a profound form of psychological and social medicine. By addressing the perceived root cause, a broken relationship in the family lineage, the ritual provided a framework for understanding suffering and a tangible path toward resolution, bringing immense psychological relief to the entire community. The legacy of the oracle bones extends far beyond their role in ancient clinics. They are, first and foremost, the origin of Chinese characters. Many of the symbols etched next to the cracks are recognizable ancestors of modern Chinese writing. But even more fascinatingly, the bones themselves provide a kind of archaeological proof for the effectiveness of their methods, at least in the minds of the Shang people. Many bones contain what are known as verification statements. After the ritual was performed and the king recovered, a scribe would often add a note like, "It was indeed ancestor Jia who caused the illness, and after the sacrifice the king did recover." These confirmations, carved after the fact, show that the Shang people saw a direct correlation between their divinatory diagnoses and real-world outcomes. For them, the system worked. The cracks in the bone were not random. They were a legible language of the divine, a map that guided the healer priests in navigating the delicate intersection of body, family, and cosmos, ensuring that the whispers of angry ancestors would never go unheard. So where do these ancient whispers lead us? The answer is, they never truly fell silent. They simply changed their form, finding refuge and renewal in the vast, resilient world of folk medicine that continues to thrive in every corner of our modern globe. The journey of a healing tradition is rarely a straight line from ancient text to modern pharmacy. More often, it's a river that flows underground for centuries, resurfacing in unexpected places. Consider the humble wisdom of a grandmother preparing a chamomile tea for an upset stomach, or the community herbalist who knows which local leaf can soothe a burn. These are not merely old wives' tales. They are the living echoes of the shaman's intimate knowledge of the forest, the Asu's practical salves, the cunning folk's generational wisdom that survived the fires of persecution. This knowledge was carried in memory, in song, and in the quiet rituals of families passed from hand to hand long after the great libraries had turned to dust. This legacy is powerfully evident in the botanical supplements that fill the shelves of our health food stores today. Echinacea, a vibrant purple coneflower native to North America, was used for centuries by Plains Indian tribes as a general remedy for everything from wounds to infections. Today, it's one of the world's most popular herbal supplements, widely taken to support the immune system and potentially shorten the duration of the common cold. Similarly, St. John's wort, a plant with bright yellow flowers, was known to the physicians of ancient Greece like Hippocrates for its healing properties. Its name itself comes from the Christian tradition of harvesting it around the feast of St. John the Baptist, a time when it was believed to be at its most potent. Modern science has identified hypericin as one of its active compounds, and it has been extensively studied for its potential benefits in alleviating mild to moderate depression, showing a remarkable continuity with its historical use for calming the nerves and lifting the spirits. These plants are direct botanical links to ancient practices, their efficacy now being measured in clinical trials rather than judged by communal experience alone. Beyond single herbs, entire systems of healing have made the extraordinary journey from ancient tradition to global mainstream. Acupuncture, once the specialized art of the Taoist practitioner balancing the flow of Qi along invisible meridians, is now offered in pain clinics and physical therapy centers worldwide. While the theoretical framework of energy channels is still a subject of scientific debate, numerous studies have shown that acupuncture can be effective for chronic pain, nausea, and other conditions. Researchers theorize that the needle insertions may stimulate nerves, increase blood flow, and trigger the release of the body's natural painkillers like endorphins. This is a fascinating meeting of worlds, an ancient practice developed through careful observation, and a spiritual world view is finding validation through the lens of modern neurobiology. The same is true for yoga. What began thousands of years ago in ancient India as a spiritual discipline to purify the body and calm the mind in preparation for meditation is now a ubiquitous form of exercise and stress relief. The postures or asanas that were designed to strengthen and make the body supple for long periods of seated meditation are now recognized for their profound benefits to flexibility, core strength, and mental well-being, seamlessly integrating the Ayurvedic principle of treating the whole person. This holistic philosophy, the idea that health is a state of balance between mind, body, and spirit, is perhaps the most significant and enduring gift from the ancient healers to our modern age. The Greek Asclepians, with their combination of dream therapy, diet, and exercise, were essentially early wellness retreats. The Ayurvedic concept of a unique mind-body constitution, or prakriti, is echoed in the modern movement towards personalized medicine, which seeks to tailor treatments to an individual's specific genetic and lifestyle factors. This stands in stark contrast to the often reductionist approach of conventional Western medicine, which has historically excelled at treating acute illnesses and trauma, like the Roman medicus on the battlefield, but has sometimes struggled with chronic, complex conditions where psychological and environmental factors play a major role. This has created a persistent tension, a cultural dialogue between the evidence-based, technologically powerful world of modern science and the intuitive, natural, and holistic appeal of traditional cures. This tension is not necessarily a conflict to be resolved, but rather a dynamic and necessary conversation. The great strength of modern medicine is its rigorous methodology, its ability to prove what works through double-blind studies and to perform miracles of surgery and emergency care. Its weakness can be a tendency to see the patient as a collection of symptoms rather than a whole person. Traditional healing, on the other hand, excels at addressing the emotional and spiritual dimensions of illness, at offering comfort and context. Its weakness can be a vulnerability to superstition and a lack of standardization. The most promising path forward is not to choose one over the other, but to seek a synthesis and integrated approach. We see this emerging in hospitals that offer acupuncture alongside physical therapy, in oncologists who study the impact of meditation on immune function, and in growing research into the anti-inflammatory properties of turmeric, a staple of Ayurvedic pharmacy for millennia. The timeless human story is not about pitting ancient whispers against modern shouts, but about learning to listen to both, understanding that the quest for healing is, and has always been, a multifaceted journey to restore harmony within ourselves and with the world around us. And so we reach the end of our journey, having walked alongside the shaman in the sacred grove, stood in the shadow of the Egyptian temple, and felt the tension in the Roman field hospital. We have witnessed a breathtaking panorama of human ingenuity in the face of suffering, a story written not in a single language but in the diverse whispers of countless cultures. What becomes undeniably clear is that the path to modern medicine was never a straight, well-lit road. It was a winding, often treacherous trail blazed by individuals who looked upon sickness with a mixture of profound reverence and fierce determination. Their explanations for why people fell ill, from wandering wombs and angry ancestors to imbalances in vital energies, may seem distant from our understanding of viruses and bacteria, but their commitment to the act of healing itself is a thread that connects them directly to the doctors and nurses of today. The true legacy of these ancient practitioners is not found in any single cure or procedure, but in the foundational principles they established through sheer will and observation. They were the original empiricists, learning through careful trial and error which plant could soothe a fever and which mushroom could bring visions. The Inca surgeon, trepanning a skull with an obsidian blade, demonstrated a courageous, hands-on understanding of human anatomy. The Silk Road apothecary, trading rhubarb and saffron, was an early pioneer of global pharmacology. Even the Mesopotamian Ashapu, diagnosing illness through the cracks in a sheep's liver, was engaging in a sophisticated system of cause and effect, seeking to bring order to the chaos of disease. They all shared a core belief that the human body, for all its fragility, possessed an innate capacity for healing, and that the healer's role was to assist in that natural process, whether by restoring spiritual harmony or setting a broken bone. This history also serves as a powerful and at times sobering reminder of the dual nature of knowledge. The same intimate understanding of plants that allowed a wise woman to cure a child could be twisted into the legend of the lethal Vishkanya. The quest for immortality that drove the Taoist alchemists led them to discover beneficial chemical processes, even as their poisonous elixirs claimed lives. The story of medicine is punctuated by these moments of terrifying error, where well-intentioned ideas like the wandering womb theory of hysteria caused incalculable harm for centuries. These mistakes are not mere footnotes, they are essential chapters that teach us humility. They show that the pursuit of health is a constant negotiation between intuition and evidence, between tradition and innovation. Ultimately, these whispered tales are a testament to the enduring human spirit. They are about the courage to confront the unknown with the tools available, whether that tool was a sacred drum, a bronze scalpel, or a meticulously calculated astrological chart. The next time you see the serpent of Asclepius on a doctor's door, remember it represents not just a single god, but this entire, vast inheritance of hope and resilience. It connects us to a time when healing was an act of profound faith, faith in nature, in the spirit world, and in the healer's own ability to serve as a bridge between wellness and sickness. We are the beneficiaries of their accumulated wisdom, their brave experiments, and yes, even their costly mistakes. The conversation they started thousands of years ago about how to live a healthy, balanced life is one we are still continuing today, and their whispers, if we listen closely, still have much to teach us. We are left to wonder, after exploring this vast world of ancient cures, which one captures your imagination the most. Does the calculated risk of Mithridatism intrigue you, or does the spiritual journey of the shaman resonate more deeply? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you've enjoyed this journey to the roots of medicine, be sure to subscribe for more explorations into the hidden corners of history.